Have you ever imagined a moment when the scales of justice don't just tip, but shatter, right in the middle of a courtroom? Not in a dramatic Hollywood blockbuster, but in stark reality, unfolding before the eyes of reporters, jurors, and those who once believed their power was untouchable. That's exactly what happened in a jaw-dropping trial when Judge Howard Gates, the man who once sat atop the bench, gavel in hand, was handcuffed and led away like a common criminal mere minutes after hurling insults at attorney Pam Bondi. The metallic click of the cuffs wasn't just the sound of a career ending, it was a symphony of justice ringing out in a system that seemed rotten to its core. But what led to this stunning downfall, and why did a figure like Gates, once a symbol of the law, become the centerpiece of public disgrace? Step into this story with me, through every detail, every twist, to uncover the darkness lurking beneath the judge's robe, and the light Pam Bondi brought forth. That day, Pam Bondi didn't enter the courtroom as just another lawyer. For her, it was familiar battleground where she'd faced off against the most powerful, from crime lords to corrupt politicians. The case at hand revolved around a wealthy real estate developer accused of siphoning public funds on a massive scale. But the real enemy wasn't the man at the defendant's table. It was Howard Gates, a judge notorious for his harsh demeanor and unpredictable rulings. From the very first moment, he made his intent clear, not just to dismiss the case, but to humiliate Bondi in front of everyone. "I hope you've brought something worthwhile, or are you just here to waste my time?" Gates sneered, accompanied by chuckles from the defense team. That moment wasn't just arrogance. It was a signal that he was hiding something. His behavior echoed the bought and paid for judges I'd seen in Illinois back in 2008. He was playing a different game, and Bondi was merely an obstacle to be removed. As Pam Bondi stepped into Howard Gates' courtroom, the air was thick, like a storm about to break. After the sharp-edged taunts Gates threw her way from the outset, everyone in that room knew this was no ordinary trial. Pressure was nothing new to Bondi. Over 2 decades of battling criminals and power brokers, from the dark alleys of Florida to the plush boardrooms of Tallahassee, she'd forged herself into a warrior not easily broken. But that day felt different. Not because of the defendant, a rich developer accused of misusing taxpayer money, but because of how Gates regarded her, or rather, refused to. He sat there, flipping through files with deliberate slowness, letting the rustle of paper echo in silence. A silence not of reverence but of menace. His actions weren't just arrogance. They were a sign he was steering this trial his way, and Bondi was in his crosshairs. The stakes that day were high. The developer stood accused of diverting millions in public funds into private projects, backed by a mountain of documents Bondi brought, numbers, signatures, contracts that could make anyone shudder. She approached the plaintiff's table, hand on her stack of papers, and began, "Your Honor, I believe the evidence will speak for itself. This case involves the misuse of taxpayer dollars, and my job is to present the facts." Her voice was calm, steady as tempered steel, but Gates didn't even look up. He leaned back in his chair, feigning a yawn, then dropped a line that stopped the room cold. "Taxpayer dollars, right? Because that's never been an excuse for frivolous cases before?" More chuckles rippled from the defense, like a hired chorus boosting the defendant's morale, but Bondi didn't flinch. She stood there, chin slightly raised, eyes sharp as knives, ready for war. The trial's rhythm slowed like the low point of a tense melody. Gates didn't rush to counter. He let everything simmer in stifling silence, as if to make Bondi feel the weight of his authority. It's a tactic I've seen from those with something to hide, dragging things out to shield dark interests. "Your Honor, I wouldn't call felony corruption charges frivolous," Bondi replied, her voice even but her jaw tight. Gates finally looked up, his icy eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second, then cut her off. "Spare me the lectures, Miss Bondi. Get to the point. I don't have all day to watch your theatrics." The courtroom stirred, not loudly, but with whispers, glances between reporters and jurors. This wasn't just a trial, it was a duel of wits. Gates wanted Bondi to lose her cool, to snap, so he could dismiss her arguments outright, but he'd misjudged his opponent. Bondi took a deep breath, straightened herself, and pulled a file from the table. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A. These financial records show—" She didn't finish before Gates interrupted again, his tone now laced with scorn. Do you always insist on drowning people in paperwork, or is this your way of compensating for something? The jab was a bullet, not just at Bondi, but at the whole room. Laughter from the defense grew louder, but the jurors' eyes didn't join in. Bondi paused, set the file down with chilling calm, then locked eyes with Gates. If you'd prefer to make this personal, I'm happy to request a recess to address any professional concerns you might have, she said. Not aggressive, not weak, but sharp as a honed blade. The game had shifted. Gates wasn't just facing a lawyer, but someone ready to flip the board. After Bondi drew that line with her cutting remark, the courtroom air seemed to solidify. Whispers from the back faded, eyes of jurors and reporters fixed on her, awaiting the next move. It was like a symphony hitting a pause. Quiet, but pregnant with the promise of an impending crescendo. Bondi wasn't the type to buckle under taunts or Gates' disdainful glares. She'd faced worse. From Miami drug lords to Florida's scandal-ridden politicians. And today, she wasn't just here to argue a case, but to expose something bigger. Gates, in all his arrogance, didn't seem to realize he'd lit the fuse to a battle he couldn't control. The pace slowed as Bondi adjusted her stance, resting her hand on the files like a soldier checking her sword before charging. She knew Gates was trying to rattle her, push her onto the defensive so he could swat away her case, but Bondi didn't take the bait. "Your Honor," she pressed on, her voice steady but now edged with steel, "I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A. These financial records clearly show discrepancies in budget allocations." She held up a sheet, the projector's light highlighting stark black and white figures. Proof the defendant's company received nearly triple the approved funds, unexplained. It was a direct hit, and the rhythm ticked upward like a wave gathering height. But Gates, ever haughty, cut in again. "Ms. Bondi, do you always love drowning people in paperwork, or is this your way of compensating for something?" The words weren't just an arrow, they were a bomb, and the defense's laughter rang out like a rehearsed refrain. Bondi paused, setting the file down with deliberate slowness, then met Gates' gaze. "Your Honor," she said, her voice low but cutting, "if you'd prefer to keep making this personal, I'm happy to request a recess to address any professional concerns you have. No shouting, no trembling, just a warning wrapped in terrifying calm." The room went silent, and the line was drawn. Bondi wasn't just responding. She'd landed a subtle counterblow, forcing Gates to face his own game. He didn't rush to reply. He sat there, lips curling slightly. Was it amusement or irritation? Hard to tell, but his eyes were colder than ever. "I don't have concerns, Ms. Bondi," he said slowly, his tone now dripping with deeper contempt. "I just know a weak case when I see one." The words stirred the room, not with noise but with gasps, exchanged glances among reporters. This wasn't a judge at work. This was a man performing, trying to bury the case before it could breathe. Bondi didn't yell or slam the table. She stood there, took a breath, then pressed on. "Then I suppose we should let the evidence speak." She picked up another file, her voice solid as rock. "These documents show the defendant's company received nearly triple the approved budget, with no explanation." She placed the paper on the projector, light illuminating every digit, a portrait of corruption so clear even the blind could see it. But as the rhythm rose, Gates cut in. "I hate to interrupt you, truly, but I think we've seen enough numbers for one day." His voice now barely masked its disdain, sending a chill down the spine. This wasn't just dismissal, it was a declaration of war. When Bondi moved to submit a motion, barely starting, Gates shot it down. "Denied, it's going nowhere." She looked up, eyes piercing. "I haven't even stated the motion yet." Gates leaned forward, hands clasped, his tone icy. "I'm refusing to indulge this circus any longer." The room wasn't just tense, it was on the brink of explosion. "You realize this is a public hearing, correct?" she asked, her voice light but sharp as a blade slicing the air. Gates didn't answer, but a muscle in his face twitched, a sign of a man losing grip. The crescendo was near, and Bondi was poised to strike the decisive blow. When Bondi delivered that icy question, "You realize this is a public hearing, correct?" and Gates's faint facial twitch betrayed his first slip of control, the courtroom air felt compressed to the point of suffocation. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, jurors' eyes locked on the two figures. Everyone sensed the final line had been crossed. It was like a symphony hitting its peak, every note vibrating with unstoppable force. Bondi wasn't just holding her ground against Gates' taunts and arrogance. She was turning the tables, step by step, with the precision of a sharpshooter who knew her target. But Gates, though teetering, wasn't ready to surrender. He leaned forward, hands clasped so tight his knuckles whitened, and said with forced calm, "Enough, Ms. Bondi." But his voice lacked its former strength. It trembled, if only for a moment, a telltale sign of a man on the edge. The trial's rhythm eased as Bondi stepped back, not out of fear, but to ready her next strike. She adjusted the papers before her, her gaze sweeping the room, as if gauging every reaction. "Your Honor," she said, her voice even but now carrying a chilling calm, "I'd like to continue presenting my evidence." Gates didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, a last-ditch tactic to regain control. That silence wasn't power. It was desperation. Finally he nodded, his voice hoarse. "Proceed, but keep it brief." Bondi didn't waver. She took a new file, placed it on the projector with deliberate care, and began, "This is a contract between the defendant and the City Planning Board, listing project costs at just over $2 million. She paused, letting the numbers sink in across the room, then laid down another sheet. "But this is an internal ledger from the defendant's company, showing the actual funds transferred were nearly double that. No explanation provided." The courtroom stirred, not loudly, but with sharp breaths, traded glances. The rhythm climbed like a wave about to crash. Bondi didn't stop. She placed a third document down, and with a killer's precision she said, "And this is the approval signature signed by Judge Howard Gates." Time froze. No sound, no breath, just a silence so heavy it pressed on the chest. Gates didn't move, his face like stone, but his hands clinging to the last scraps of his authority. "Your Honor," Bondi continued, her voice now slicing through the air, "would you care to explain why your signature appears on an unauthorized financial transaction involving the defendant?" The question wasn't just an arrow, it was a bomb, its blast echoing through the room. Reporters nearly leapt from their seats, jurors gaped, even the defense attorney, previously smirking, froze solid. Gates finally reacted, his voice shaky but defiant. "That document is inadmissible." Bondi tilted her head, eyes unwavering. "How so?" He took a deep breath, his gaze darting. "It was obtained improperly." But Bondi didn't let him slip away. "Your Honor, this document was subpoenaed by my office," she replied, her tone soft but weighty. Gates slammed the bench, his voice rising. "I'm ruling it inadmissible. It won't be considered here." The room wasn't just tense, it was a powder keg ignited. Bondi crossed her arms, staring Gates down, and said with chilling calm, "You realize this is a public hearing, correct? That the media is here, that everyone in this room just saw you dismiss critical financial evidence without reason?" Gates's face flushed, a muscle twitching hard, but he didn't reply. Then, like a final dagger, Bondi pulled a small recorder from her briefcase, set it on the table, and pressed play. A low, unmistakable voice filled the room. "Take care of it. Don't let her get those ledgers." It was Gates, no mistaking it, and everyone there knew it. The silence that followed wasn't just stifling, it was a storm held at bay, ready to erupt. Gates sat still, not breathing, not moving, while Bondi stood firm, her eyes fixed on the recorder, daring him to challenge it. This wasn't just evidence, it was a quiet revolution in the courtroom. When Gates's voice echoed from that recorder, the courtroom was sucked into a void of absolute silence, so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. Bondi stood there, her gaze locked on the small device, like a gladiator who'd just delivered the killing blow, waiting for her foe to fall. The story's rhythm dipped, like a wave crashing, then receding, as Gates finally found his voice. "Miss Bondi," he said, trembling but trying to sound firm, "I don't know where you got that," but he trailed off, as if realizing no excuse could save him. Bondi didn't let him finish. "The question isn't where I got it, Your Honor," she cut in, her voice light but razor sharp. "It's who you were talking to." The room stirred again, not with noise, but whispers, glances between reporters and jurors. The rhythm rose once more, like a symphony building to its next peak. Gates pounded the bench, face red, shouting, This is outrageous. This entire hearing is descending into chaos because of your grandstanding." But Bondi didn't budge. She gave a faint smile, not of triumph, but of someone who knew she held the truth. "Chaos?" she echoed, her tone almost amused. "I'd say this is clarity. We finally have some transparency in this courtroom." The words hit like a stone, shattering still water, shaking the room. This wasn't just a comeback. It was her final declaration of war, and Gates had no escape. The pace eased as Bondi sat down, resting her hands on her papers, as if awaiting the next move. Gates no longer held his earlier swagger. He sat still, fists clenched, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Then, the real climax erupted. Bondi turned toward the back of the room and gave a subtle nod, barely noticeable until the door swung open. Firm footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and a stern voice sliced through. "Howard Gates, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud and abuse of judicial power." The sound of handcuffs snapping shut rang out, sharp, cold, like a hammer striking his fate. The room exploded, not in silence now, but with gasps, camera flashes, and reporters' pens tearing at paper. Gates didn't go quietly. He yanked against the officer, voice hoarse. "You can't do this. This is a disgrace." But the officer didn't flinch. "You have the right to remain silent," he said, flat as a machine. Gates spun to Bondi, his eyes no longer cold but blazing with fury and fear. "This is political. This is a setup." Bondi stood, adjusting her blazer, and replied with icy calm, "No, Your Honor, this is accountability." The words weren't just a response, they were a verdict, and the cuffs locking around Gates' wrists were the period on his career. It wasn't just power he lost, it was the respect of those who'd once revered him. But the story didn't end there. As Gates was led away, the rhythm dipped again, revealing another player, the real estate developer, the case's main defendant. He shot up, chair scraping the floor, voice trembling. "Wait, we can work something out." His eyes darted between Gates and Bondi, sweat rolling down his face. Bondi turned, tilting her head slightly, and asked almost curiously, "Work something out? Why are you so nervous?" He stammered, forcing a shaky laugh. "Nervous? No, this is just insane." But Bondi didn't reply. She just watched him, her gaze cutting, and it was clear he was hiding something. Perhaps a secret bigger than what Gates had spilled. This web didn't stop here. It could stretch to the corridors of power in Washington. When the courtroom door closed behind Howard Gates, the echo of metal cuffs lingered, leaving a room steeped in shock and unanswered questions. Bondi stood firm, her eyes steady, no hint of gloating, while the developer fumbled with his panicked offer to work something out. Her question, "Why are you so nervous?" hung like a sharp blade, slicing through his facade without needing more words. The moment felt like a lull in a dramatic symphony. After the tempest of truth had roared, the courtroom sank into a tense quiet, as if everyone knew the story wasn't over. Gates had fallen, but the shadows he'd shielded remained, lurking in power's hidden halls. The trial's rhythm slowed as Bondi returned to her seat, adjusting her papers with uncanny calm. She didn't glance at the defendant, the jurors, or the frenzied reporters. She focused on her task, as if the case still had miles to go. The developer, face pale and hands trembling on the table's edge, clearly felt the same. He forced a weak smile, muttering about a misunderstanding, but his eyes darted wildly like a trapped animal. That wasn't just panic, it was the mark of a man who knew his safety net was fraying. The rhythm rose again, like a new wave swelling. Bondi looked up, her gaze sweeping the empty judge's chair, then settling on the jury. "I believe we still have a trial to finish," she said, her voice steady but heavy with purpose. It wasn't just a reminder of her duty. It was a statement that justice didn't halt because one titan had toppled. But bigger questions loomed. Who was Gates protecting? Who was behind those threats on the tape? The developer, or a greater force hiding in Washington's plush offices? This wasn't a lone case. It could be the thread to a federal scandal, something as massive as Watergate or the Illinois judge bribery of 2008. The room quieted, but the air stayed thick, as if all knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. Bondi kept her focus, but she too sensed it. This corruption ran deeper than what had surfaced. Cases like this never end with one fall. They're like a spider's web. Pull one strand, and the whole structure quakes. Gates might be in cuffs, but others lurked in the dark. And who would be the next to face justice's light? Bondi had opened a door, but could she, or anyone, step through without being swallowed by what lay beyond? A bigger storm was brewing, and this tale had only just begun. When Bondi declared, "We still have a trial to finish," and her eyes passed over Gates' vacant chair, the courtroom seemed to settle after the storm, yet undercurrents of tension lingered. It was a slight dip in this dramatic symphony. No more clanging cuffs, no more of Gates' shouts or the defendant's desperate pleas, just Bondi's resolve amid a system shaken to its roots. But that calm didn't last. The rhythm surged as the questions she and everyone felt loomed large. Who stood behind Gates? How deep did this corruption run? Gates' collapse wasn't the end, it was the start of a greater fight, one Bondi had ignited with rare courage. From Gates's opening taunts to the cuffs sealing his fate, this case proved no one is above the law, not robed judges nor penthouse tycoons. Bondi didn't just win a battle, she roused a system slumbering in shadow. But the true climax lies ahead. Who will fall next? Justice never sleeps, and this story is only beginning.